Welcome to the Santana 20 Championship Sailing video. My name is Andrew Kerr. I'm here at the Eugene Yacht Club at the venue of this year's Santana 20 National Championships. This video is going to show you a myriad of things ranging from boat preparation on the Santana 20, everything you need to know about preparing the boat layout. The purpose is to help you sail your Santana 20 and have more fun while doing it. I'm on a new boat right here, sail number 911. The layout you're seeing on the Santana 20 is one of the new layouts, and it has the new deck arrangement, as you can see. The new deck was brought into the class by Tom Shock and the WD Shock Corporation in 1996 and has very much improved the sailability of the boat for both the skipper and the crew. Now, of course, the old deck is still very good as well. And one of the wonderful things about the Santana 20 is it retains its integrity and sails well despite what age it may be. At this championships, we have the latest Santana 20, sail number 932. We have the very first Santana 20 built in 1976, sail number 1. And that goes a long way to explain the longevity and the vitality of the Santana 20 class. As we look at Tinker Toy, we can see the arrangement at the console here of all the sail controls. There's a jib fine tune for the halyard. So when you're sailing with the Genoa or the jib, you can adjust this fine tune and it adjusts the halyard. It's an 18-to-1 purchase internal in the mast. A very nice feature. We have the boom vang here on a swivel cleat that runs from one side to the other, so the crew can adjust the vang from sitting on the high side. Always a nice feature when you're setting your boat up is to set your controls up in such a way that the crew can make the necessary sail adjustments while sitting on the high side and sailing the boat. You may take time to look at your boat and ask yourself, do my sail controls meet that criterion? We also have the mainsail Cunningham, which is led back here on the starboard side. The outhaul arrangement comes through a turning block and can be adjusted with a cleat here. The Cunningham is a fairly simple arrangement with a hook that hooks into the sail and pulls down on the luff of the sail. On the mast, the modern setup now for Santana 20s is to have all the halyards for raising and lowering the sails on swivels on the mast here. You can see we have this device which raises and lowers the spinnaker pole. It's the topping lift. Over here we have the spinnaker halyard to help raise the spinnaker for us. And on the port side, on a swivel with a universal ability to be adjusted, is the Genoa or jib halyard. Having the halyards at the mast there, what that fundamentally does is allows the forward and middle crews to access the halyards very, very easily, particularly on spinnaker launches and spinnaker takedowns. The accessibility and the fluidity of these controls is what makes the Santana 20 easier to sail and more of a joy. Now, coming further back in the cockpit, you can see we have the winches are mounted on the cabin top here. Not all teams, but most teams will cross-sheet the Genoa sheet. They'll actually bring the Genoa sheet up to the winch, and take a number of wraps, and then adjust the Genoa from the high side. Now, for Santana 20 owners not familiar with that, the benefit of that is the crew can adjust the Genoa or the jib from the high side without moving their valuable weight to the leeward or low side, which in turn heels the boat over. That's something called cross-sheeting. And cross-sheeting you'll see more in our video footage on the water when we're out sailing tomorrow. As we look around, we also have this adjustment here, which is called the aft lower. The aft lower is a controllable device which, if one isn't familiar with the Santana 20, can be something that one has to learn somewhat. It's an adjustment that runs on a traveller and can be adjusted by the middle crew typically, and there's one on either side. What the aft lower does is it essentially keeps the lower part of the mast in column or straight when the mast is bent utilizing the backstay. In the absence of having an aft lower adjustment, i.e. just a stationary shroud or maybe no shroud at all, one thing you'll observe with your Santana 20 mainsail is that when you bend the mast utilizing your backstay, you will notice that the mainsail will get way too flat or even inverted. When you pull on the aft lower adjustment, one of the things you'll notice is it brings this lower portion of the mast into column or gets it straighter, and then the mast bends more in sympathy with the design luff curve of the mainsail. The sailmaker will design the luff curve of the sail to fit the bend of the mast, and the aft lower will help that luff curve assume the correct shape. When we're sailing downwind, we ease these aft lowers all the way off on both sides, and the reason is we want the mast to lean forward when we're sailing downwind, either winging the jib out or flying the spinnaker, to try and project more of the sail area forward and encourage the boat to sail a lower course. So those are the aft lowers, and have a look at your boat, see what your aft lower arrangement is, and ask yourself, is it easy to adjust? You can see the arrangement here is simply a 2-to-1 purchase led to a cleat on the side deck here. Not all boats have aft lowers, so that is a unique thing to the Santana 20. What we also have back in the cockpit is the arrangement for the Genoa. You can see this is the fairlead track with the ratchet block. This particular block is called a ratchematic, which is a very nice block in the sense of it ratchets when under loading, gives you the mechanical advantage. But the nice thing is that when you tack, you ease the sheet out, the ratchet block immediately disengages and the Genoa goes a lot more fluidly across to the other side. You can see further forward here, these tracks, these are for the jib. In 1996, the Class Association deemed that it was legal for us to move our jib tracks inboard so that we could sheet the small jib closer to the center line of the boat and help the boat point closer to the wind. What it's done is it's made using the small jib very attractive, particularly for lighter teams and also for when the breeze kicks in. You sail with the small jib on the Santana 20 and it typically sheets through a block here. We send it through this ratchet block here and then up to the winch and we cross sheet it and the boat sails very, very well. Prior to 1996, the jib tracks were outboard, and so we found that when we used the jib, the boat didn't point very close to the wind. That's why the Class Association decided to allow us to put these jib tracks on the closer to the center line there. Typically, teams will generally change from the Genoa, the 150% sail, to a jib at about 16 or 17 knots. Now what that influences, or what influences that decision generally, is how heavy the crew is, and also the state of the water. Is it choppy or is it smooth water? In our experience, the smoother the water is, the shiftier the wind, the more apt we are to go to the jib early. However, if there's some substantial light spots, or we have a heavy crew, or there's substantial waves, we'll tend to hang on to the Genoa a little bit longer, maybe into the 17, 18 knot region. It does depend on crew weight, but one thing we found is that with these inboard tracks and with the new designs on the jib, you can go to the jib very early these days and be very competitive. That's a nice feature, particularly for Santana 20 sailors who either are very light or short-handed, or maybe a family crew that's just new to the boat. It's nice to know that you've got the option to go to the jib and the boat to sail very competitively indeed. Boat tack's a lot easier with the small jib, you'll find. Over here we have a spinnaker ratchet block. It's again a ratchematic, very similar to the Genoa block. The Ratchet-matic is very nice for when you're adjusting the spinnaker, because again you get the ratchet or mechanical advantage when you pull on the line, but when you ease it, it disengages itself and becomes a lot more fluid. In fact, we recommend Ratchet-matics on the Genoa blocks and also on the spinnaker turning blocks on the boat. You'll find it makes your sail handling a lot more fluid, essentially. As we progress further aft here, we can see an interesting arrangement for the backstay and also the mainsail traveller. On this boat, Tinker Toy, they have set up what's called a windward sheeting traveller. So what happens is when you tack over, the leeward or low side will immediately uncleat itself, and so you can pull the traveller up to the windward side to trim the mainsail effectively without having to uncleat the leeward side. So windward sheeting travellers are very nice and they're very fluid. We also have this main sheet arrangement, which you can see, which has led to what's called a Barney post, which is a nice strong device the skipper can brace their foot on when they're steering. There's also a ratchet block for the main sheet here, which disengages, which is nice when you go to ease the mainsail out. Makes it a lot more fluid. There's also a very good backstay setup. One thing we've learned about the Santana 20 is having a good purchase on your backstay is very important to the fluidity and the use of adjusting the backstay. In this particular case, we have what's called the course tune, which is this arrangement here, which is actually a cleat underneath the main sheet, and that's a nice adjustment there. So that's your course tune to basically bend your mast with. And then we have a fine tune arrangement, which is just forward of the traveller, so we can fine tune the backstay when we're going upwind. The interesting thing about the Santana 20 is that you can bend the mast significantly. I'm going to pull on this fine tuned backstay, and let's see if we can observe some bend in the mast. Should start to see the top of the mast bend considerably. Now I'm going to ease the backstay off, and you should see the mast straight. What you'll find is the top sailors in the Santana 20 class will play the backstay as much, if not more, than the actual main sheet itself, because they understand that it is has a direct effect on the entire sail plan for the Santana 20. When you bend the mast with the backstay, you do a myriad of different things. You bend the mast, as we observed, first and foremost. The byproduct of that is, in bending the mast, it moves the top of the mast closer to the end of the boom, and it makes the leech of the mainsail, the trailing edge of the mainsail, looser or more open, and it spills the wind off the back of the mainsail. Very good for depowering the boat as the wind increases. The other byproduct of increasing backstay tension as the wind increases, and I'll progress forward here, is as you bend the mast more and more, it tightens the forestay right here. Now, in tightening the forestay, what that does is it stretches the luff of the sail and the leech of the sail on the Genoa or jib fore and aft, or front to back, stretches it this way and creates a much flatter head sail. One thing you'll notice is that if you're sailing and you don't have enough backstay tension, you'll notice the forestay will be very, very loose or sagging, and the Genoa or jib will be too round and too full, and the boat will be heeled over on its side. The other thing you'll notice, if the backstay isn't tight enough, is that the mast will be very straight, the mainsail will be very deep, and the leech of the mainsail will be very firm. The boat will be tipped over on its side with lots of what's called windward helm or pressure on the rudder. That's slow. One thing we've noticed in the Santana 20 is that if you can sail these boats as level as possible going upwind, you'll basically use the keel and the rudder much more effectively, and the boat will go more forwards. It'll produce more boat speed and more ability to point close to the wind. We heel the boat over, we've noticed you lose the effectiveness of the keel and rudder, and the boat has a tendency to go sideways or make a lot of leeway. Top skippers play the backstay all the time. When the boat's overpowered, they'll pull the backstay on, bend the mast, flatten the sails. When they do that, when top Santana 20 crews do that, we'll also pull on the aft lower as the backstay is increased. The more backstay we apply, typically the more aft lower we apply. Reason? You apply more aft lower to keep the lower part of the masting column and stop it over bending. What you'll notice is that if you don't pull the aft lower on in conjunction with a lot of backstay, the mast will bend to such a point that you'll experience and see overbend wrinkles emanating from the clew of the sail up to the inboard end and up to the luff of the sail. Those are called overbend wrinkles, and those are indicative of overbending the mainsail luff curvature relative to the mast bend. So the aft lower is tightened as the backstay is tightened to try and keep that basically consistent. As the wind lightens, typically the backstay is eased, the mast is straightened, and we tend to ease the aft lower as well. That keeps everything uniform. Obviously it takes a lot of practice as well, but having fluid controls like on Tinker Toy here and many boats in the Santana 20 class, having the ability to adjust things fluidly is really the critical thing with Santana 20 layout. Tuning the mast. What we recommend at the association is that you thoroughly read the tuning guide from the sailmaker that has made your sails, and they should give you accurate readings for how much tension there is going to be on your shrouds, how much you should rake or tilt the mast. And I can give you an example of what we're looking for on a good setup for a Santana 20 tune. First off, we're looking to set what's called the correct rake. Rake is the tilting of the mast in the absence of backstay tension. In other words, how much the mast is tilted either forward or aft without actually bending it. Now what we found is that the rake number is 51 inches, so that your mast basically is tilted aft in such a way that it provides you with something called weather helm, or the ability for the boat to turn up into the wind, but not so much that the boat rounds up and the helm is too heavy. The principle of rake is this: the more you tilt the mast aft towards the stern, the closer the boat will go to the wind, but the heavier the helm will be. It'll tend to make the helm heavier because you're essentially moving the center of effort, the aerodynamic component, more toward the stern. If you can imagine this boat balanced on a weather vane, that's going to cause the boat to turn into the wind. If the mast isn't raked sufficiently aft enough, then what will happen is the combined aerodynamic force with the mast straight or even leaning forward will have a tendency to push the bow away from the wind and rob you of much needed pointing ability when going close hauled. How do we adjust the rake? Rake is a function of how long the forestay is. The longer the forestay is, the more the mast will sit aft, the more raked you are. The shorter the forestay is, the more the mast will remain straight or even leaning forwards, the less rake you have. So it's important to determine the difference between rake and bend. Bend is the amount of curvature you induce into the mast through backstay and aft lower tension. Rake is how much you tilt the mast aft depending on how long your forestay is. Now what we recommend, and the vast majority of sailmakers recommend, is that you rake the mast 51 inches. Now, in order to establish whether you have that rake or not, the advice is to take your jib halyard and take it to the bottom part of the black band, your measurement band for your gooseneck. Right to the bottom part there. Tighten it up and then swing it forward and make a mark with the magic pen right here on the forestay. That's how you find that point. Now you get a tape measure and you measure from that mark all the way down to the center pin on the turnbuckle on the stem head. That measurement should be 51 inches. If it's 53 inches, there's too much rake. If there's 48 inches, there's not enough rake. And so what you'll do is you'll adjust the turnbuckle on your forestay until this measurement from here to the center pin is 51 inches. Numerous national champions have used the rake of 51 inches. So we've found it to be a fast setting, and that's the recommendation for setting up rake on the Santana 20. We've looked at rake on the Santana 20 as part of our tuning. Now we're going to turn our attention to shroud tension. Sailmakers these days have produced very good and very accurate tuning guides that we can use as references when tuning our mast. What we recommend is that you purchase or obtain a loose gauge. The loose gauge I have here is the professional tension gauge model PT1 that fits the Santana 20 shrouds. What this does is it helps us measure the tension on the shrouds from side to side. The first thing we do is we sight up the mast and we make sure that the mast is straight. And we adjust our uppers and our lowers just to the point of where they're hand tight. We then sequentially increase the tension on the upper and the lower on each side until we reach what we call the base setting. Now, the base setting is advocated by the sailmakers to be your average setting for your shrouds. 25 on the upper shroud using the loose gauge here, and 20 on the lower shroud is what we consider our base setting. It's our middle setting, approximately for medium air. Now that does vary from team to team depending on crew weight, but medium air generally is considered to be about 8 to 14 knots. In lighter air conditions, you'll find it's beneficial to ease your shrouds, both uppers and lowers, on both sides, to allow the mast to sag slightly in the middle, and also to increase what we call forestay sag. Forestay sag is when the forestay literally sags to leeward with the pressure of the genoa. In light air conditions, when we're going upwind, we're looking for about 4 to 6 inches of forestay sag. And we measure that by sighting up the forestay and seeing where the biggest curve in the luff of the genoa is. And we measure that relative to the straight mast and the center line of the boat. As the breeze increases, the recommendation is to increase your shroud tension to the point where you will actually go above base setting up to 28 and even up to 24 on the measurement on the uppers and lower shrouds. The reason you do that is to prevent the mast from spooning or bending too much to leeward. It's also to help tighten the forestay, which in turn has a tendency to stretch the head sail fore and aft and flatten the head sail. A lot of these pictures of the sails we'll see when we're on the water tomorrow and as the week progresses. So 25-20 is what you call your base setting. So we set the mast up to that. When we go sailing, one of the things that we've learnt to do with tuning is to look at the leeward or shrouds on the low side. When we're going upwind, we found one of the key telltales to having the proper tension on the shrouds is we like to see the leeward or low side upper with a little bit of slack in it, just a touch. And we like to see the leeward lower just a little slacker. So there's just a little slackness in it. Now if the boat is not overpowered, that indicates to us we probably have the tune about right, assuming that the mast is straight and that we've measured our numbers equally from side to side and the numbers are even. The advice primarily is this: if you're going upwind and you notice that your leeward shrouds are very taut and the boat feels very underpowered, that indicates to you that your upper and lower shrouds are too tight and that you need to ease them off to give you the necessary power in the sail plan for more acceleration. If you're going upwind and you notice your leeward or low side upper shroud and lower shroud look very, very loose and the boat feels very overpowered, that's indicative of the shrouds being too loose, that the mast is leaning over to the side too much, and that we can rectify that by increasing our shroud tension on the uppers and lowers until, as I say, we see a little bit of slackness, just a small slackness in the upper and slightly more slackness in the lower. So that's principally what we look for when we're going upwind, in conjunction with using the tuning gauge and utilizing the tuning numbers from the sailmaker. Watch the leeward shrouds very carefully. They will tell you the story, you'll find, of how the mast is set up. Is it set up properly or not? And the question to always ask yourself when you're sailing the boat, particularly upwind, is am I overpowered or am I underpowered? Very often, a lot of teams will know when they're overpowered because the boat's heeling over. There's a lot of pressure on the rudder. So most pertinently, very often, it's am I underpowered? Do I have the necessary power to take us through the light wind to keep the boat moving fast at all times? And that's, as I say, the visual gauge of looking at the shrouds can be very helpful in conjunction with using a tuning gauge and consulting your tuning guide. That's it for now.